This episode is brought to you by HASA. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the Bottom Feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. I just recently did a podcast on emergencies out there that I've run into, and I thought I would follow it up with this one here where I talk about equipment and ways to prevent equipment failure and some common equipment failures you're going to run into out there on your pool route. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support. For me, I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. I find that the biggest factor with poor running equipment or equipment failures is the age of the equipment. And you probably have realized this too in your business that when you're dealing with old pumps, old filters, old heaters, failure is going to happen, problems are going to develop, and the age of the equipment is the critical factor, in my opinion. Of course, newer equipment does fail, and you do have problems with it. There's some manufacturer defects. For a long time, Waterway had problems with their filters, leaking at the drain plug. That's been fixed. Then you have, of course, Pentair having failures with their salt cells with the temp sensor. That was fixed. Hayward had a major defect where the variable speed pump drives would fail and turn into basically a brick. You have no VS pump because the drive failed prematurely. So there are manufacturer defects. I'm not going to say there isn't. And products are going to have bad runs here and there. You know, there was one year, I'm kind of trying to think what year it was. Maybe it was 2017 or 2015, where Pentair had a really bad run of their single-speed whisper flow pumps. You would put it in, and then the motor would die like a month later, and this was a whole batch of these whisper flow pumps. And of course, that's been corrected. They're usually pretty reliable, but I'm talking here about failures, and I'm talking about common things you'll notice, and not technically manufacturer defects, which do happen. So let's talk a little bit about some common filter failures you're going to run into. I think the primary filter failure that I see out there is a problem with the filter leaking from the clamp. Now, this is not necessarily something that you're going to have to replace the filter for, but it's something that to be aware of, that certain filters do have a bigger issue with leaks from the O-ring than other filters. Hayward filters are notorious for leaking from the O-ring, even with a brand new O-ring on it. I'm a little ahead of myself, but that's kind of one of the solutions with the filter leak. But Hayward has, a history of having that kind of a problem where you put a brand new O-ring on and it's still leaking. But that's the first place you're going to look for a filter leak and the O-ring is worn out after you clean it. It's good to have extra O-rings for the filter tank on your truck when you do filter cleanings, just to make sure that if that does happen, you can change it. And you can't tighten that clamp any tighter. Sometimes it starts leaking. So the first thing that I always do is change that tank O-ring. I also use silicone spray, silicone lube. I used to use the Boss brand, the BOSS. It was a purple can. They don't really have that readily available in a lot of places anymore. I'm not sure why. But if you go into any auto parts store, just get RV grade silicone and use that to spray on your O-rings after cleaning them. I don't like Magic Lube because it's messy and you can't really get sometimes a good spread on the O-ring. You may miss a spot or two. With this silicone spray, you just spray around the O-ring on a tank and no problems there. It also has properties where it will make the O-ring last longer. So I definitely would recommend silicone spray over Magic Lube for the filter. And this is primarily the area of the filter that has a problem. It'll drip from that area, and simply changing the O-ring in most cases solves that problem. An easy fix. Secondary to that, you have a failure at the clamp and the bolt assembly. What I mean by this is that you'll go to remove that bolt that has a compression spring. Most of the manufacturers use this setup, and what happens is that if you try to take it off wrong, you're going to strip the metal, you're going to strip the threads on the metal rod which is attached to the clamp. So the clamp is one entire piece for safety, of course, and you can't separate that. So once you start to ruin those threads on that, then the bolt won't go on correctly, and sometimes it won't come off correctly. I've had a filter where it took me like 15 minutes to get that bolt off because it was stripped so badly, but I wanted to get it out so I can replace the clamp. And I just had my wrench and I was trying to turn it, and it was just really hard to get it off of there. My whole goal was to remove that clamp so I could put a new one on, and it just took forever to get it off. I guess I could have cut it off, but it's one of those things where I just started doing it that way and I just wanted to finish it, and it's something that does fail. So one trick that you can do, and this is why one thing I like Magic Lube for, because the tube opening is the exact size necessary to actually get the tube of Magic Lube and then get the threaded part of the clamp and then stick it in the Magic Lube, and that way all the threads are coated with Magic Lube. And then you put the nut back on, and you want to make sure that it's going on straight every time you put it on there. You can tell if you're using the multi-torque socket set and you have it on just a little bit off, you'll see like metal shards coming out when you're putting it on, and that indicates that it's wearing out, of course, but that may indicate that you have it on wrong. But if you lube it up with the Magic Lube tube by sticking the threaded part in there and pulling it out, it just really helps extend the life of that particular part of the filter, which is pretty expensive, by the way. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. Place. Another filter part that fails is the drain plug area. Now, if you have a Pentair Clean and Clear Plus, they put the drain plug in probably the worst location any engineer can think of putting it. It's under the inlet outlet. You need a special wrench to get it off. And be careful removing those drain plugs, because if you do damage that drain plug, you have to take everything out, try to get it out from the inside, which is a pain. And the person that designed that, it's a ridiculous location for the drain plug. I just don't like it. But if you have a lot of Clean and Clear filters, you have that. So I don't remove that drain plug if I can avoid it. And I try to clean the filter the best I can with that in there, because I've stripped them out before and it's a problem. But drain plugs also are a problem. Make sure you lube those up. You know, if you have to replace it, if it starts leaking from the drain plug, that's the problem. But usually it's that little O-ring on the drain plug you can replace to fix that. Now, I would talk about backwash valves, but that's like a whole other podcast by itself. So I'll leave that for another one. Those are some of the main filter issues you're going to run into. They're all pretty minor. As the filter gets older, you may have to replace the pressure gauge on top or the air bleeder. For the Hayward filters, again, their air bleeder assembly is notorious for failure. There's like a giant ping pong ball in there, and if you have a Hayward filter with the black air relief assembly on top, simply take that off. It actually untwists pretty easily. Hose it off really well to try to get that working again, because a lot of times air will build up in there because that's not working, and that's one that has a major issue. The Pentair air bleeder assembly that's on top of their FNS Plus and Clean and Clear Plus filters is extremely fragile. So when you're taking that off to clean it, try not to drop the lid, because you try not to break that also when you're opening it and closing it. I've broken those before. So carry an extra one of those on your truck as well, because chances of you breaking one of those is very great, because I've broken them myself. And then, of course, other things are just cracks and age with the filter. But I wanted to give you some realistic problems you're having with filters, and this is what you're going to run into mainly out there. As the filter gets older, the clamp will start to fail because the threaded part starts to get stripped, and you'll have other leaks and things like that appear. Let me move on to pumps. Pump leaks are very common as well. As the pump gets older, you may see a leak from maybe the seal of the pump underneath, and this is very common. If you look at the pump, you kind of get down and look at it from underneath, and you see water dripping from the center of the motor, more than likely that's the pump seal, and that's probably what you're going to have to replace to get the leak to stop. It's not something that is going to be simple. You have to take the motor apart, take the impeller off, and put a new seal on. But over time, as the motor gets older, as it runs hot, those pump seals will fail, and you're going to notice a little drip leak right underneath the motor. You're thinking maybe that the water's coming out of the motor, but it's not. It's coming out of the pump seal, and the pump seal is there to keep the water, basically, the wet part of it, out of the motor. And so when that fails, water is going to drip from underneath the pump or underneath the motor itself, and that needs to be replaced. It can also leak from the seal plate gasket. I find this to be very common with certain pumps. Other pumps, you never have a leak at the seal plate. I find that the Super 2 pumps by Hayward always have a problem with the seal plate, especially when you take off the motor and try to put it back together. But a lot of pumps don't really have this problem. I've had pumps leaking from the drain plug. Now, for the drain plug on the pump, there's actually an O-ring on there, so change that O-ring if necessary. Usually, the leaks are solved by changing an O-ring on there, or changing, of course, the pump seal in the case I mentioned earlier. But the O-rings they wear out along with the pump itself as it gets older. You're also going to find that as the pump gets older, you may have a problem with the capacitor. The start or run capacitor is on top of the pumps usually. Those are the best pumps. There's some that are built into the back, which is a problem, but usually they're on the top of the pump. So you go to turn on the pump, you're going to hear it go and click off. So that's basically the capacitor. Those are easy to change, but I find that as the pump's getting older, they seem to go through capacitors a lot more, probably because they're getting older and the voltage spikes or whatever. I'm not an electrician, but I would imagine that's what's causing it. So keep an eye on those older pumps, because the capacitor will go out and you have to replace them sometimes yearly or every 6 months. I've had that happen as well. And then, of course, you have the bearings wearing out in the motors. Now, the nice thing about variable speed pumps is that they seem not to have this problem very often. Now, you may hear a variable speed pump making a lot of noise like the bearings are going out. You've heard this noise before, I'm sure. You get back there and then you hear this really loud, grinding, kind of piercing noise. I could probably try it here. That's like the bearings going out in the motor. I think I did a pretty good job there, actually. So that means that you have to replace that motor eventually. Now, you may hear that with the variable speed pump, but that's really not the bearings going out. When it's really cold out, 40 degrees out or 50 degrees out, those things have some trouble when it's cold, and you're going to hear that similar noise as if the bearings are going out, but once it warms up and starts running for a few minutes, that noise goes away. And by the way, a single speed pump, when the bearings are going out, sometimes the noise will go away once it starts warming up and getting hot, and that's something that happens once in a while. But once they're really going out, that noise is going to be continuous, and in some cases you can hear it from the front of the house before you even get in the backyard. That's how loud it gets. Neighbors may even call the city on the customer. I've had that happen too. So that's a sign that the bearings are wearing out. Now, you can pull that off, take it to a motor shop and have the bearings rebuilt. It just depends on how old the motor is, because they have to get the shaft off and the bolts off of it. If it's really old, they can't take the motor apart to replace the bearings, so it's a shot. If you look at the motor and there's no paint left, it's all rusted, chances are they're not going to be able to rebuild the bearings. And they can do that. They usually give you a 6-month guarantee on it. Some give you a 3-month guarantee. So again, if you do have the bearings redone, it's not something that you can guarantee the customer won't happen again. But I've had pretty good success with that. And I've had them last 2 or 3 years longer being rebuilt. And they call that rebuilding the motor, but it's just basically changing the bearings. And I find that that may be a solution in some cases, and you don't have to replace the motor. So those are some common things that go wrong with the motor: leaks, and then of course the noises I mentioned there. You may also have a leak from the intake and outlet in a threaded part that may leak, especially if the pump ran dry, if the water got low in the pool. That could happen as well. And I'm not going to cover too much on pumps not priming. That's actually a whole separate episode as well, when you can't get the pool pump to prime. And let me move over to salt cells real quick, and then I'll touch on heaters briefly. Salt cells, the main problem you're going to have with a salt cell, there's probably 2 problems you'll run into, or I'll say 3. One of them is the salt cell gets calcium buildup and then it stops producing. A lot of times you can't see the salt cell plates. If you're lucky enough to have like a true clear salt cell, you can see the plates to the top. But most of the time you have to take them off the plumbing and inspect them to see if there's calcium buildup. So if you're getting a light saying, cell dirty, sometimes you get a low salt light coming on. All those are related to the fact that the salt cells got calcium buildup, needs to be cleaned off in a muriatic acid water solution. That will do the trick. And check with the manufacturer on how much water to acid ratio you're going to need. Another problem you have with the salt system is there's not enough salt in the water. So the water doesn't have enough salinity to it for it to produce chlorine. So again, you should have a digital salt meter that you can put in the pool and get a salinity reading. And it should be over 3,000 parts per million for most salt systems to operate. And then the last thing that happens is that the pool may not be running long enough or at a high enough speed to produce enough chlorine during the day. So check the VS pump to make sure that you have the speed set over 1800 RPMs is when the salt cell should activate, and you may need a higher speed so that it keeps producing the chlorine for that pool during the whole day. So that's basically what happens with salt systems. There's not much more to it. These are the basic issues, and of course there are other issues that happen beyond that, but these are some basic failures that I'm going over here. And heaters, I can probably spend the whole podcast on heaters, but there are some basic things to check. The igniters are what wear out the most in the heaters. So the first thing when the heater's not igniting, I would definitely check the igniter first. That's always usually the first problem, because that's a pretty common wear part. There are other problems also. I guess before you check the igniter, make sure the gas line is actually on. A lot of times the gas line is off. The little handle is turned off. It's embarrassing, but I've checked the heater thoroughly for a long time, and then I realized that the customer had the gas valve turned off. It was one of those, oh yeah, moments where now I checked that first. But igniters are usually a problem. The error codes are all a little different on the heaters, so they'll give you an error code, usually letting you know what that is, and you can look it up. A lot of times, it could just be as simple as the filter being dirty. So it needs more, the filter has too much pressure in there, and so the heater won't fire up for that reason. And I think that happens a lot. So cleaning the filter sometimes solves the problem. But in general, those error codes are important because they'll let you know exactly what's wrong with the heater, and then you can maybe fix it with your knowledge, or you have to call someone out there to do it. I tend not to go beyond, the igniter. If there's a bad temp sensor, I can replace that, no problem. If there's a bad thermistor or a thermal regulator, usually those are pretty easy parts to replace yourself. The error code should lead you to one of those parts. Now, if it's anything beyond that, it's sometimes better to call out a service technician, because then they can run a full diagnostic. And besides those 3 parts, you're getting into some other areas of the heater where you may have a double failure or blower failure, things that you probably can't do yourself unless you've worked on heaters a long time. Sometimes the burners have spider webs on it. That would cause some heaters to fail. But beyond that, I just don't think it's logical to be there troubleshooting beyond what you can normally change or what your knowledge level is. At that point, call in someone that can fix the heater and do a thorough repair. These are very common things that you'll see out there with the filters, pumps, and heaters and salt cells. And I wanted to keep it basic so you can see some of the more common problems you run into, some of the more common equipment failure causes that you'll see out there on pool routes. If you're looking for other podcasts, you can go to my YouTube channel every Monday through Friday. I put a new episode there for you. And if you're wanting to get more episodes, you go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Click on the podcast icon. There'll be a drop-down menu of over 1,700 podcasts there for you. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a rest of your week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.